The story of Rome begins not with historical facts, but with a myth so powerful it shaped an empire for over 1,000 years. Picture this: twin brothers named Romulus and Remus, cast into the raging Tiber River by their wicked great-uncle who feared these boys would one day challenge his throne. But the gods had other plans. A mother wolf discovered the abandoned infants and suckled them as her own cubs, before a humble shepherd found them and raised them to manhood. This isn't just ancient storytelling, it's a psychological blueprint that reveals everything about Roman character. What other civilization chooses a foundation story featuring fratricide? When the twins grew up and decided to build a city, they quarreled violently over its location. The dispute escalated until Romulus murdered his own brother Remus. The Romans weren't embarrassed by this brutal beginning, they celebrated it. Brother killing brother was hardwired into Rome's DNA from day one, foreshadowing the civil wars that would eventually tear the empire apart. But the myth reveals more than just violence. It shows Rome's revolutionary approach to identity. Romulus faced an immediate crisis. His new city had no citizens. His solution was radical for the ancient world. He declared Rome an asylum for criminals, runaway slaves, outcasts, and the dispossessed from across Italy. While other cities claimed their founders had sprung miraculously from their native soil, Romans proudly proclaimed themselves descendants of refugees and asylum seekers. The next problem was even more pressing. No women meant no future. When neighboring tribes refused to give their daughters in marriage to what they considered a band of criminals, Romulus resorted to deception. He invited the Sabines to a religious festival, then gave a signal for his men to abduct all the young women. This rape of the Sabine women became one of the most depicted scenes in Roman art, not as a shameful memory, but as a founding necessity. These disturbing stories weren't kept in dusty archives, but displayed prominently throughout the empire. You could visit Rome centuries later and see the supposed hut of Romulus on the Palatine Hill, still maintained as a tourist attraction. The Romans understood that myths aren't about historical truth, they're about psychological truth. The wolf that saved the twins wasn't chosen randomly. Romans saw themselves as predators in a world of prey, blessed by the gods for conquest and domination. After 7 kings, including the legendary Romulus, the Romans made a decision that would echo through history. They rejected monarchy and created something revolutionary, a republic where power was shared among elected officials serving limited terms. The hatred of kingship became so ingrained that centuries later, calling someone a king was tantamount to signing their death warrant. Julius Caesar would learn this lesson the hard way. The early Roman Republic was a rough-and-tumble democracy where plebeians fought patricians for political rights, where tribunes could veto consuls, and where every citizen had a voice in the popular assemblies. But what truly set Rome apart from other Mediterranean powers wasn't political innovation. It was their unique approach to warfare and conquest that would build the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Most ancient warfare followed a predictable pattern. Every spring, the young men of one city would raid their neighbors, hoping to return with slaves, cattle, and glory before winter. It was glorified banditry, not organized conquest. Rome changed everything. Instead of just looting and leaving, they built permanent relationships with defeated enemies. Rather than simply destroying opponents, they demanded that conquered peoples provide troops for future Roman campaigns. This created an unstoppable snowball effect. The more Rome conquered, the larger their military became. A stone inscription shows Romans and allies taking sacred oaths together, sealing bonds that would last for generations. By the 3rd century BC, Rome could call upon more than 700,000 soldiers. Not just Romans, but Latins, Italians, and former enemies who now fought under Roman eagles. The genius wasn't in superior weapons or tactics. Roman equipment was often inferior to their enemies. The secret was in cooperation. Rome didn't just defeat enemies, they absorbed them, offering paths to citizenship, alliance, and partnership that no other ancient power provided. They understood that lasting conquest required willing cooperation, not mere subjugation. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals the sophistication of Roman alliance building. Bronze tablets record complex treaties outlining mutual obligations. Coins show Romans and allies standing together in ceremony. Even Rome's first gold currency depicted oath-taking scenes, broadcasting the message that Rome kept its promises to friends while ruthlessly destroying oath-breakers. This system proved so successful that it carried Rome from a small Italian city-state, controlling perhaps a few hundred square kilometers, to masters of the entire Italian peninsula. Over 100,000 square kilometers of territory and millions of people, all bound together in an intricate web of alliance, obligation, and shared interest. Rome's expansion beyond Italy was almost accidental, triggered by a minor dispute in Sicily that escalated into a death struggle between two superpowers. Carthage controlled the Western Mediterranean through naval dominance and commercial networks stretching from Spain to Lebanon. Rome commanded Italy through military might and alliance systems. These two approaches to empire were bound to collide. The First Punic War marked Rome's transformation from a land power to a naval empire. Roman historians claimed they simply copied a captured Carthaginian ship, building replica after replica until they had a fleet. Modern marine archaeology tells a more dramatic story. Bronze rams from ancient warships discovered off Sicily still contain fragments of enemy vessels they smashed in the war's final battle. These weren't distant strategic maneuvers, but desperate hand-to-hand combat, where ramming speeds left sailors with hours to contemplate their fate before inevitable collision. One Roman helmet, recovered from the sea floor with its cheek pieces intact, brings us face to face with individual tragedy. The last person to wear it probably died when his ship was rammed and sunk in 241 BC. Roman efficiency even extended to quality control. One bronze ram bears an inscription reading Lucius Quintius the Quaestor approved this ram, while a Carthaginian ram found nearby simply says, "May the god Baal strike your ships and make holes in them." But the most famous chapter belonged to Hannibal Barca, whose audacious march across the Alps with war elephants brought the conflict to Italy's doorstep. For 15 years, this military genius devastated Roman armies, culminating in the catastrophic defeat at Cannae, where 70,000 Romans died in a single day. Yet despite early victories, Hannibal couldn't deliver the knockout blow. Rome's alliance system held firm. Their Italian allies remained loyal, providing the manpower reserves that ultimately won the war. The turning point came when Rome took the war to Africa. Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal at Zama in 202 BC, ending Carthaginian dreams of empire. But Rome wasn't finished. 50 years later, despite Carthage posing no military threat, Rome launched a final expedition. The city was completely destroyed, its population killed or enslaved, its territory sown with salt. As the Roman senator Cato had repeatedly demanded, Carthage must be destroyed. The year 146 BC marked a watershed in world history. Rome not only obliterated Carthage, but also sacked Corinth, Greece's wealthiest city, in the same year. Two of the Mediterranean's greatest urban centers were eliminated in 12 months, establishing Rome as the region's sole superpower. Some Romans celebrated this achievement, but others worried they had reached a dangerous peak from which they could only fall. The destruction of these ancient cities changed the rules forever. Rome now had power without limits, but no one knew how to handle such dominance. Victory over Carthage and Greece unleashed a torrent of wealth that transformed Roman society beyond recognition. The Mediterranean became Mare Nostrum, our sea, a Roman lake where goods, people, and profits flowed along routes protected by Roman power. But this prosperity came at a terrible human cost that would ultimately destabilize the very empire it enriched. Archaeological evidence from Spanish olive groves reveals the scale of this economic revolution. Southern Spain became one vast agricultural factory, producing over 7 million liters of olive oil annually for Rome alone. This wasn't traditional farming, but industrial monoculture, just olives, olives, and more damn olives, as one modern farmer describes it. Amphora handles stamped with estate names show that families like the future Emperor Hadrian's made fortunes from this liquid gold, using profits to buy political influence in Rome itself. The transformation was visible everywhere. Shipwrecks off the French coast contained dozens of marble statues, jewelry, scientific instruments, and luxury goods. Even the olive pits from the crew's last meal. This was mass-produced culture, the Roman brand spreading across the empire like modern globalization. Red pottery from Gallic workshops reached every corner of the empire, creating the first truly international consumer market. But the engine driving this prosperity was human misery on an unprecedented scale. The Roman Empire ran on slave labor, millions of people reduced to property through conquest, piracy, and kidnapping. Archaeological excavations in Spanish silver mines reveal the brutal reality. Galleries barely wide enough for a man to crawl, worked by slaves using primitive tools. Roman picks and crowbars weigh several kilograms. Imagine swinging those for 12 hours underground. Most heartbreaking is the tombstone of Quintus Articulus, a 4-year-old boy depicted with mining tools in his hands. We don't know if he died in the mines, but it's as a miner that he's remembered. Modern estimates suggest each year these operations killed thousands while producing 9 million silver coins. The currency that funded Roman armies and aqueducts built on countless broken backs. The wealth concentration created social tensions that would prove fatal to the Republic. Traditional Roman farmers, the backbone of the citizen-soldier system, were displaced by slave-worked estates. Veterans returned from decades-long campaigns to find their families' land absorbed by wealthy speculators. The gap between rich and poor became a chasm that no political system could bridge. Meanwhile, the Mediterranean's transformation into a Roman lake created new security challenges. Pirates controlled shipping routes, kidnapping Roman citizens and disrupting vital trade. The scale was staggering. The island of Delos became the Mediterranean's largest slave market, processing thousands of human beings daily. Pirates weren't just criminals, but sophisticated organizations that sometimes controlled entire regions. The war against piracy became Rome's first war on terror, with similar consequences. In 67 BC, the Roman people granted Pompey the Great unprecedented powers to clear the seas. He succeeded in just 3 months, but the precedent was set. External threats could justify concentrating power in a single individual. The Republic's death warrant was written in the Senate's decree, giving one man authority over the entire Mediterranean. The Roman Republic died not from external invasion, but from internal competition among ambitious generals who commanded more loyalty from their armies than from the state. 3 men epitomized this new breed of politician warrior: Pompey the Great, who cleared the Mediterranean of pirates; Marcus Crassus, who crushed Spartacus's slave revolt; and Julius Caesar, whose conquest of Gaul would make him the richest and most feared man in Rome. Caesar's Gallic wars weren't just military campaigns, but literary masterpieces. He wrote his own account, ensuring his version of events would survive for millennia. Modern readers can still follow his strategies at battlefields like Alesia, where massive earthworks surrounded a Gallic stronghold. Caesar claims complete control in his narrative, but the archaeological evidence suggests a more chaotic reality. Ancient warfare often came down to luck as much as planning. The scale of Caesar's conquests was staggering and deliberately publicized. He claimed to have killed over 1 million Gauls while enslaving another million. Even Romans questioned whether their general had crossed the line from conquest to genocide. Some senators proposed putting Caesar on trial for war crimes, with Gauls serving as judges and jury. Archaeological evidence from Gallic battlefields reveals Roman military technology designed more to maim than kill cleanly. Iron spikes that would pierce through leather sandals and stick in the foot, impossible to remove due to barbed edges. Caesar's famous crossing of the Rubicon River in 49 BC crystallized the Republic's central dilemma: how to control generals whose armies were more loyal to them personally than to the Roman state. When Caesar marched on Rome with a single legion, he triggered a civil war that engulfed the entire Mediterranean. The stakes weren't just political, but civilizational. Would Rome remain a republic or become an autocracy? The war's climax came in Egypt, where Caesar pursued his rival Pompey, only to find him already dead, assassinated by Ptolemaic courtiers hoping to curry favor. Caesar reportedly wept at the sight of his old ally's severed head. Whether from genuine emotion or political theater, we'll never know. But Egypt offered consolations in the form of Cleopatra VII, the last Ptolemaic pharaoh, and one of history's most formidable rulers. Caesar's assassination on the Ides of March 44 BC solved nothing. Instead of restoring the Republic, it triggered another round of civil wars. The conspirators claimed to act for liberty, but their own actions revealed the Republic's fundamental contradictions. How could a city-state's institutions govern a world empire? How could citizen soldiers serve 20-year campaigns thousands of kilometers from home? How could Republican equality coexist with imperial wealth? Mark Antony's subsequent alliance with Cleopatra represented more than romance. It was a vision of Rome as an Eastern monarchical empire drawing on Egyptian and Persian traditions. When Caesar's heir Octavian defeated them at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, he didn't just win a naval engagement. He determined that Rome's future lay in the West, not the East. Cleopatra's suicide marked the end of Ptolemaic Egypt and the last independent Hellenistic kingdom. The Republic was dead, but from its ashes rose something unprecedented, a political system that would endure for centuries and provide the template for empire ever since. The Romans had accidentally created the blueprint for autocracy disguised as democracy, a lesson not lost on modern politicians. The empire's greatest innovation wasn't architectural, but social. Roman citizenship, once limited to inhabitants of a single city, gradually expanded to include people across the Mediterranean. Tombstones reveal the complexity. Syrian merchants married British women, African officials governed Spanish provinces. Germanic soldiers retired to Italian farms. Archaeological analysis of skeletons from Roman Britain suggests 20 to 30% of urban populations were immigrants, creating multicultural communities unprecedented in the ancient world. This expansion culminated in 212 AD, when Emperor Caracalla granted citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire. Approximately 30 million people became Romans overnight. Why he did this remains mysterious, but the result was revolutionary. A Syrian could appeal to Roman courts using the same laws as a Spaniard. A British merchant could trade in Egypt under the same legal protections as an Italian. For the first time in human history, a single legal and cultural framework spanned 3 continents. Yet this golden age rested on systematic exploitation. Roman mines in Spain employed thousands of slaves, including children like 4-year-old Quintus Articulius, whose tombstone shows him with mining tools. The emperor's dinner parties featured exotic delicacies, while slaves served silently in underground tunnels. Gladiatorial games entertained crowds while prisoners died for entertainment. The Pax Romana was both humanity's greatest achievement and its most successful system of organized oppression. Still, for millions of people, Roman rule brought unprecedented opportunities. Provincial elites could rise to the highest positions. Senators from Gaul, governors from Africa, even emperors from Spain. The Roman dream, like the American dream, didn't work for everyone, but the possibility kept the system stable for centuries. The 3rd century AD shattered the empire's golden age illusions in a cascade of interconnected crises. Political stability collapsed as armies made and unmade emperors with bewildering frequency. In 50 years, Rome had over 50 emperors, most dying violent deaths within months of taking power. The economy imploded under military expenses, currency debasement, and trade disruption. Plague ravaged cities, while barbarian tribes pressed against increasingly porous frontiers. But the deepest challenge came from within. Christianity. This obscure Jewish sect, born in a backwater province, preached ideas that threatened Rome's religious and social foundations. Christians refused to sacrifice to traditional gods, rejected gladiatorial entertainment, proclaimed loyalty to a kingdom beyond earthly empires, and embraced poverty as virtue rather than misfortune. Their stubborn resistance to imperial religious requirements seemed like treasonous madness to Roman authorities. The story of Vibia Perpetua exemplifies this conflict's human cost. In 203 AD, this young Roman mother was thrown to wild beasts in a Carthaginian amphitheater. She could have saved herself simply by sacrificing to Roman gods, but instead she guided a gladiator's sword to her own throat rather than renounce her faith. Her execution horrified even the crowd. Amphitheaters were designed for punishing outsiders and criminals, not young mothers from respectable families. Yet such martyrdoms, intended to demonstrate state power, instead advertised Christianity's supernatural strength. Detailed accounts of torture and execution were circulated among Christian communities, creating a parallel narrative of resistance to imperial authority. The blood of martyrs became the seed of the Church, proving that Rome couldn't control human conscience through violence alone. Emperor Decius attempted to resolve the religious crisis systematically. In 250 AD, he ordered every inhabitant of the empire to sacrifice to traditional gods and obtain certificates proving compliance. Archaeological papyri from Egypt preserve these certificates, revealing how this ancient loyalty test actually worked. Many Christians complied or found loopholes, but others chose death over compromise, creating a crisis of governance that lasted generations. The military situation was equally dire. Hadrian's Wall in Britain represents a new defensive mindset. For the first time, Rome admitted its expansion had limits. Similar fortifications across Europe and Africa marked boundaries the empire could no longer cross profitably. The hunters had become the hunted, forced to defend rather than attack. Germanic tribes, driven by climate change and population pressure, no longer sought individual raiding opportunities but permanent settlement within imperial borders. The imperial response was radical restructuring. The empire was divided into multiple administrative zones, each with its own capital and Augustus. Rome remained symbolically important but politically irrelevant. Trier in Germany, Milan in Italy, and Thessalonica in Greece became new power centers closer to threatened frontiers. The city of Romulus no longer controlled the Roman world. This crisis of the 3rd century nearly destroyed the empire, but it also forced innovations that would extend Roman rule for another 2 centuries. New military techniques, administrative structures, and religious policies emerged from the chaos. The question was whether these reforms could address the empire's fundamental contradictions or merely postpone its inevitable collapse. In 312 AD, Constantine won the Battle of Milvian Bridge and claimed victory came through divine assistance from the Christian God. Whether through genuine spiritual conversion or shrewd political calculation, he became Christianity's imperial patron, fundamentally transforming both empire and church in ways that echo through history today. Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 AD legalized Christianity and began its transformation from persecuted sect to state religion. The revolution was stunning in its speed and completeness. Within a single generation, Roman senators who once demanded Christian blood were building churches and debating theological questions. The same amphitheaters that witnessed martyrdoms now hosted Christian festivals. Pagan temples were converted to churches or abandoned to ruin. The emperor's new capital, Constantinople, became a new Rome, where Christian symbolism replaced pagan imagery. Built on the site of ancient Byzantium, it combined Roman administrative efficiency with Christian spiritual purpose. Constantine decorated his city with pagan statues looted from across the empire, not from religious conviction, but as displays of power. The obelisks and monuments that still grace modern Istanbul represent this cultural synthesis. But this wasn't simply religious revolution, it was cultural transformation that reshaped law, art, education, and social relations. Christian values gradually influenced Roman legal codes, softening some brutal practices while introducing new forms of intolerance. The same empire that once tolerated religious diversity now persecuted pagans and heretics. Christian emperors like Theodosius banned the Olympic Games and closed ancient temples, ending traditions that had survived for over a millennium. Augustus solved the Republic's contradictions through brilliant political theatre. He claimed to have restored the Republic while actually creating a monarchy in all but name. His genius lay in maintaining republican forms while wielding autocratic power. Senators still met, consuls were still elected, tribunes still held office, but everyone understood where real authority resided. The emperor's own account, inscribed on bronze tablets across the empire, reveals his three-part strategy: massive generosity to the Roman people, spectacular building projects, and constant military victories on the frontiers. The Augustan settlement created the longest period of peace and prosperity the Mediterranean world had ever known. The Pax Romana wasn't truly peaceful. Wars raged constantly on the frontiers, but it brought internal stability and unprecedented connectivity. Roman roads stretched over 880,000 kilometers, longer than the modern US interstate system. Aqueducts carried mountain water to desert cities. Roman law provided uniform justice from Britain to Egypt. Archaeological evidence reveals the empire's staggering scale and sophistication. The amphitheater at Italica in Spain, built by the Emperor Hadrian for his hometown, accommodated 25,000 spectators, half the capacity of Rome's Colosseum, but the town's population was only 8,000. It was like building a stadium half the size of Wembley for a city the size of Cambridge. This wasn't practical entertainment, but imperial propaganda carved in stone. Hadrian himself embodied the empire's cosmopolitan character. Born in Spain to an Italian family, he spent half his 20-year reign touring provinces, personally inspecting everything from Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain to the Temple of Zeus in Athens. His villa at Tivoli became a microcosm of imperial diversity. Egyptian granite columns supported Greek marble pediments, while African mosaics decorated floors paved with stones from a dozen provinces. Archaeological evidence reveals this transition's complexity and contradictions. Churches were built inside former temples, their altars placed directly over pagan sacred spaces. Christian symbols appeared alongside traditional Roman motifs in mosaics and sculpture. Biblical scenes were depicted using classical artistic techniques, creating a hybrid visual culture that was neither purely Roman nor purely Christian. The transformation wasn't universal or immediate. Rural areas remained largely pagan for centuries. The word pagan itself comes from Latin paganus, meaning country dweller. Traditional festivals were rechristened with Christian names but retained much of their original character. Roman gods became Christian saints, often with remarkably similar attributes and functions. Constantine's religious revolution couldn't solve the empire's fundamental political and economic problems. Barbarian pressure intensified as climate change, political instability, and imperial weakness drove mass migrations. The Roman army increasingly recruited from these same barbarian peoples, creating impossible loyalty conflicts when Germanic soldiers faced their own relatives across battle lines. Economic decline accelerated as tax revenues fell and military expenses soared. The Western Empire became a hollow shell, maintaining imperial pretensions without imperial substance. Cities shrank, trade networks collapsed, and the sophisticated administrative systems that had governed the Mediterranean for centuries gradually broke down. When Visigoth leader Alaric sacked Rome in 410 AD, the psychological shock reverberated across the civilized world. The Eternal City had proven mortal after all. Augustine of Hippo wrote, "The city of God," partly as a response to pagans who blamed Christianity for Rome's decline. His work became one of the foundational texts of medieval political thought, arguing that earthly empires were temporary while God's kingdom was eternal. The traditional date for Rome's fall, September 4th, 476 AD, when Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, represents not an apocalyptic ending, but a bureaucratic transition. The barbarians, who supposedly destroyed Rome, were often its former allies, soldiers, and administrators. They didn't reject Roman civilization, they competed to inherit and control it completely. Modern archaeology revolutionizes our understanding of this period. The barbarian invasions were more like corporate takeovers than military conquests. Visigoth and Ostrogoth kings issued laws in Latin, minted coins with Roman symbols, and restored rather than destroyed classical monuments. They weren't trying to escape Roman civilization, but to possess it entirely. In Ravenna, Theodoric the Ostrogoth built churches that combined Germanic royal traditions with Roman imperial imagery, creating a new synthesis rather than a crude replacement. The Eastern Empire, centered in Constantinople, continued calling itself Roman for another 1,000 years until Ottoman conquest in 1453. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, died defending the walls of Constantinople while calling himself Emperor of the Romans. Modern Greeks still sometimes use the term Romeos, Roman, to describe themselves, maintaining an unbroken chain of identity stretching back over 2 millennia. More importantly, Roman institutions, laws, and cultural patterns survived the empire's political collapse. Medieval European kingdoms were ruled by kings who claimed to be Roman emperors, using Roman titles, Roman law, and Roman governmental structures. Charlemagne's coronation as Roman emperor in 800 AD began a tradition that lasted until Napoleon abolished the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. Even then, the German Kaiser and Russian Tsar both derived their titles from Caesar. Christianity became Rome's most successful export, creating what historians call Christendom, an empire of minds rather than territories. Medieval popes claimed authority over kings, Renaissance artists depicted classical themes, and modern democracies adopted Roman symbols and concepts. The United States Senate meets in a building designed like a Roman temple. The British Empire consciously modeled itself on Roman precedents. Even totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia appropriated Roman imagery to legitimize their power. Yet Rome's legacy remains deeply ambiguous, encompassing both humanity's greatest achievements and its most systematic oppressions. The same civilization that created sophisticated law, magnificent literature, and engineering marvels that still function today also perfected slavery, genocide, and bureaucratized violence. Roman roads carried both merchants and slave traders. Roman law protected citizens while crushing barbarians. Roman peace was built on Roman conquest. This ambiguity explains why Rome continues to fascinate and trouble us. Every modern empire, democracy, and nation-state grapples with fundamentally Roman questions. How do you balance freedom and order? Can diversity and unity coexist? Do the ends justify the means? When does necessary security become oppressive control? These aren't ancient problems, but eternal ones, and the Romans' struggles with them continue to illuminate our own. They make a desert and call it peace. Tacitus captured this duality perfectly. They make a desert and call it peace. This brutal clarity still resonates because we recognize ourselves in Roman contradictions. We admire their achievements while being horrified by their methods. We appreciate their legal protections while questioning their imperial violence. We benefit from their innovations while condemning their exploitation. Perhaps most significantly, Rome created the template for globalization, the first civilization to unite diverse peoples under common laws, languages, and institutions across 3 continents. Modern debates about immigration, citizenship, cultural identity, and imperial responsibility all echo Roman precedents. The European Union faces similar challenges to those that confronted Roman administrators. How to maintain unity while respecting diversity, how to balance local autonomy with central authority, how to manage borders and citizenship in an interconnected world. As one historian observed, there's a little bit of the Romans in the head of every one of us. That's why, 15 centuries after its political collapse, the Roman Empire remains humanity's most studied, debated, and influential civilization. Every time we walk into a government building with columns, use a legal system based on written law, or debate the responsibilities of citizenship, we're engaging with Roman innovations. The conversation between past and present continues because Roman questions remain unanswered. Their empire fell, but their problems didn't disappear. They just became ours. Understanding how the Romans succeeded and failed helps us navigate our own imperial moments, democratic crises, and civilizational challenges. We are all Romans now, heirs to both their glory and their guilt, still trying to solve the puzzles they left us. In the end, Rome's greatest achievement wasn't conquest, but transformation. The ability to turn enemies into allies, strangers into citizens, and local identities into universal ones. Their greatest failure was the inability to sustain these transformations without violence and exploitation. The tension between these poles, inclusion and exclusion, peace and war, justice and power, defines not just Roman history, but human history itself. That's why Rome still matters, and why its story will continue to be told as long as humans struggle with the fundamental questions of how to live together in an imperfect world.